and welcome to mini episode number 436 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And I have 3 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 2nd of January 2025. And story number 1 comes from Jeanette. For several years I commuted to and from work on a bike, and that commute took me across the Golden Gate Bridge twice a day. The bridge is open to cars and cyclists 24/7, but pedestrians are only allowed during daylight hours. During dusk though, there's a bit of overlap where there are some pedestrians still lagging on the bridge, but the gates only open to let them off, or let people with bicycles on. I spent a lot of time on that bridge by myself at night, as during the winter months it was always dark when I finished work. The Golden Gate Bridge is well known for its beautiful views and architecture, and is a popular attraction for tourists in San Francisco. But sadly, it also has a reputation for being a quite popular final destination for those who found life to be too much. I have definitely felt a mix of emotional energy on that bridge day and night. But on one particular night, the fog was hanging over the water in such a way that you could see the reflection of the city on the water, but you couldn't see the actual city. It was so thick that you couldn't see the bridge more than about 25 metres overhead either. As I rounded the first suspension tower on the city side of the bridge, I saw a guy standing looking out into the fog. This was really odd, because it had been dark for some time, and he didn't have a bike. I suppose he could have been a straggler, but usually the bridge patrol would have cleared the bridge of pedestrians by that hour, so who knows. At any rate, I stopped next to him and said, "Isn't it cool how you can see the reflection of the city on the water?" He said he hadn't really noticed, but now that I pointed it out, it is cool. I responded by saying, "That's just a reminder that there is a lot out there on the other side of the fog." Something I couldn't even imagine was coming out of my mouth, but here we were. He said, "I suppose you're right." I told him I had to get home and to have a good night, and then pushed off on my bike. Something made me look back over my shoulder, and the dude was gone. There is no way he could have disappeared that fast without sprinting lightning fast, nor could he have hopped the railing. But I did look over just in case, and there was no sign of him. As I was riding home after that, I had this strange feeling of sadness and peace that I can't really explain. I wondered if that had happened at all. I still don't know if I imagined it, but I get goosebumps whenever I think about it. The second story is quicker and a bit more light. In college and the years after, I used to get a bit of a thrill from driving fast on country roads at night. This is something that much older me thinks is just terrifying, and this experience might be part of why. One evening I decided to take the long way home just because I liked the windy road I got to drive that way. Now my papa had recently passed, but I was very close with him. He was a very cautious man who had spent his whole life in or between wars in Ireland. Born in 1915, he lived through the Revolution, the Civil War, World War I and World War II, and in the 70s and 80s he and I spent our time watching the Troubles unfold in the north, so he was always very safety conscious. So on this night that I had decided to drive home the long way, I was accelerating towards the top of a fun hill that was followed by a bunch of rolling hills that were like a wild roller coaster for a car. As I neared the top of the hill, I heard my papa's voice clear as if he was sitting in the seat next to me, so clearly that I turned to look to see the empty passenger seat that I was sure he was speaking from. His voice said, "You better slow down here. There could be a deer over that hill." I did slow down because clearly he was there. When I got to the top of the hill, there were in fact 2 deer just on the side of the road, their eyes reflecting back at me from the headlights of my car. So let's go back to the story about the Golden Gate Bridge, right? And the Golden Gate Bridge, if you've ever been on it, it is absolutely beautiful. It is just a wonderful piece of architecture, and you do get amazing views and all that jazz, and it's a tourist hotspot, etc., etc. But it is also, unfortunately, a suicide hotspot. And because of that, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I really hope that what you saw that day was an apparition. I really hope that it wasn't anything more sad or more nefarious than that. You'd have to think that somewhere like the Golden Gate Bridge, that there would be so much energy and residual energy that is left over from all those poor souls who have taken their lives there, you know. And I think there's probably a lot of stone tape theory going on somewhere like the Golden Gate Bridge. And I don't know if Dan ever talked about this on the podcast, I don't remember, but he had a very similar experience on the Golden Gate Bridge many moons ago where he noticed a man standing on the edge of the bridge. 1 second he was there and 1 second he wasn't. And he found that incredibly difficult to process for quite a long time, as you can imagine. So I hope that, that feeling of peace that you felt afterwards, I know that you had a feeling of sadness, but I hope the feeling of peace was what you held on to afterwards. And as for your second story, let me tell you, our loved ones, they never leave us, do they? I was watching a TikTok with this creator called Billy, who's an English guy who makes these really funny videos. I enjoy them. And it was basically your guardian angel, your loved one, your family member in heaven watching you making poor decisions and going, for fuck's sake, why are you doing that? But I'm very glad that your papa was there to be like, you better slow down. There could be deer over that hill. And that's so specific, isn't it? You could say that you heard your granddad's voice saying, slow down. But you better slow down. There could be deer over that hill, and then there is deer over the hill. That is so specific. Let me tell you, that man was looking out for you for sure. And our second story today comes from Kate. I previously wrote to you about the home in St. Louis, about what I had assumed to be a banshee, and you suggested a hag. I started researching, and while she sounded more like the hag, I was wide awake. The house was bad, so it could have just been a result of the house, or maybe the bad that existed there. None of our friends would be caught alone in the house, and never at night. Slumber parties were never held there. If we were lucky enough to get them to come and play, all of our friends demanded that we stay with them at all times. They wouldn't even go into the bathroom by themselves. The sister, just older than me, once saw a giant black shadow in the basement where our laundry was. My oldest sister was awakened by something slapping her and a stinging sensation which ended up being claw marks once she looked. There were 4 of us girls born to our parents, so we lived in pairs. I shared a room with a sister just older than me until I was 16. We didn't have a doorknob at that house, so the door never shut completely. My sister would constantly complain of not being able to sleep. It took us a good 6 months or 7 months to finally convince her to tell us why. She finally said there was a face watching her every night from the crack of the door, just staring at her. Our parents didn't believe her, so their remedy was for us to switch beds. That first night, I saw it. It was not at all shy, and it didn't care who had watched. There it was, looming in the crack of the door. The face was almost featureless and pale. There were black spots where the eyes should be, and there was a mouth. I'm not sure how I remember the mouth, as I honestly can't say it was that noticeable, but I knew I could see it. We sat there, the face and I, staring at each other. The terror I felt was so much that I couldn't move. I was afraid of what it would do if I moved. I'm sure at some point I fell asleep because the next thing I was aware of was daylight. We had other instances. We didn't have peace in that house. The stairs were in the middle of the house, completely enclosed in on 3 sides, with a door on either side of the landing at the top. I've seen a woman coming down the stairs whilst I was again the only one home. I've had showers where the curtain was violently ripped open. It wasn't a gentle flutter that would have happened if the air conditioner had come on. It was opened from one wall to another. My father had a job that caused him to move often. We moved 20 times before I was 19. We were only in that house for a year. The day we moved was a relief. I remember looking at that basement window and just feeling like the thing in the basement was looking back at us as we prepared to drive away. We moved a lot, but I never felt more relieved to leave a house for the last time. So for context, while I record this podcast, I record with my back to the room. Okay, I'm in my kitchen and I'm sitting in the window and I record with my back to the room. And that description of that face just staring through the crack of the door made my blood go cold and made me look over my shoulder. And it really does sound like there was a lot of negative stuff going on in that house. You know, if yours is the house where people are like, yeah, we're not going to stay over there at night because it's too scary, you know that some weird shit is going on. And like a giant black shadow in the basement. Oh, and it's all like, I don't like when things get physical. You know, like your sister waking up to something slapping her and having a stinging sensation, and then she's got claw marks on her. Like, that is all so physical, and it just feels violent and aggressive and scary. And I think there's a certain aggression as well to this face watching her every night from the crack in the door. You know, she must have woken up that morning that you saw it and been like, I fucking told you so. And I feel like if you were able to say, you know, this face in the door, it looked like an older woman, you know, or an older man. You know what I mean? If you had some sort of descriptors for this face, it might make it easier. But the fact that it's featureless, with this sort of barely a mouth and, you know, shadows where eyes should be, that is so terrifying. However, I am glad that you left. You know, I'm glad that you were able to leave and go, right, well, that's enough of that house. Let's pretend that never happened. Oh, hideous. And our final story today comes from Andrea. About 10 years ago, I was staying at my mother's house and we both had an experience. She was in a leg cast and relegated to her downstairs rooms only, so I figured I would help her out by eating her food and fighting with her about staying in her wheelchair. I was staying in her upstairs guest bedroom above the garage, which had a direct set of stairs to the bottom floor. No one else was with us. One night I was lying on the guest bed studying for a class when I heard her climbing up the stairs. Knowing she's stubborn about proving her strength, I called down to her, "Are you trying to climb the stairs right now?" She answered back, "No, but I'm listening to that." So then we were both silent, just listening to footsteps climb the stairs towards the guest room and realising no one was there to make them. Nothing ever came of it. In 2019, my big cow dog Maverick was getting grey in the whiskers, so I decided we would take a last hurrah camping trip from Texas to Salem for the weekend of Halloween. I mapped out the KOA campgrounds to use along the way, as I didn't want us to get too primitive if it was just the two of us. Our first stop for the night was in Tennessee, where we rolled into a beautiful KOA in the hills around 9 p.m. We found our reserved spot at the very edge of the property, where our only neighbour was a tent about 500 feet to our left, and the woods set at our back. I pitched our tent hurriedly, tossed Maverick in to rest and set up a lantern inside. I took a photo of him sitting in the tent, his big bat ears drooping from exhaustion, with the caption, "Bat Dog, protector against the axe murderers," for Instagram. How droll I am, I know. So we settled into the tent, and Maverick was already starting to saw logs against me, when I heard something to my right. It sounded like grass crunching rhythmically, with the gait of human footsteps. I've heard deer, I've heard bears, I've heard squirrels and raccoons. This was decidedly different. And bipedal. First I thought, oh, it must be a neighbour needing to pee. But the neighbour was to our left, and then I thought, I must be tired and mishearing this. Then Maverick shot up, pointed his body in the direction of the sound, and let out the lowest, most guttural growl I'd ever heard from him. It was so deep that even I got a little unnerved by his resolve. Unnerved and relieved that I had him there at the same time. We both sat still, and I had my buck knife out, ready for the tent to get disturbed by whatever was making the footsteps. Then, very near to our tent, the footsteps turned around and slowly receded into the woods. We both fell asleep that night out of exhaustion, but I also truly believed that dog had saved our lives. He let whoever that was know that he wasn't an animal worth messing with. We went on to Cape Cod and enjoyed a wet Halloween camping and sightseeing, albeit a little bit closer to our neighbours this time. Maverick passed away in 2020. My future husband and I were camping in Big Bend when my mom called to let me know that we'd better get back quickly, and we made the 8-hour trip back to town to be with him before it happened. Thankfully. I owe him my life, and besides that, he was the best boy. If you're wondering why I still camp, I guess I do too. But we only had a brown bear to deal with in Big Bend. I honestly, right, I know I've been through this. I've said this countless times on the podcast, as with everything else I ever say on the podcast. I don't get camping. I don't understand it, you know. And it's, you know, camping here in the UK, it's obviously relatively safe. Your biggest threat is other people, I suppose. Camping in America, where people are like, there's bears and coyotes. Are there coyotes? Yeah, there are. There's bears, there's coyotes. Like, there's all sorts of things that can hurt you, that can come and get you in the middle of the night. I don't know what to do if I see a bear. And you know when people are like, if you see a brown bear, you should do this. If you see a black bear, you should I'm not going to remember, in the heat of the moment, faced with a bear, I am not going to remember what to do in the event of which bear. I've seen videos of people being chased by like mountain lions. You know, I am not going camping. I'm not doing it. And I say that like somebody who is, you know, forced to go camping regularly. Nobody ever asks me to go camping except for Tim, who I steadfastly ignore about going camping out in the moors, you know. But it really does sound like that dog saved your life. You know, it sounds like whatever it was that was outside that tent, I'm assuming it was Bigfoot. I'm assuming it was something Bigfoot-esque. Heard this growl and went, ooh, I can't see that animal, so I'm not going to take that risk. And I do feel like if it was another human, that his reaction potentially wouldn't have been so defensive. You know, he might have been woken up and been curious and been like, I don't know what that is, but probably less defensive, you know. And that like low guttural growl, when you've got a big dog and you have never heard them growl like that, it is scary. We had a big dog at home called Dude who had the yappiest bark for a big dog, this high-pitched bark. But then every so often at night time, he would go out into the back garden in the dark and let out like a big boy bark. And every time I'd be like, oh, that's actually really scary. What are you barking at, first of all? And second of all, I'd forgotten you could make that noise. I'm very glad, Andrea, that Maverick was there with you for that situation, because we're gonna lean into it and we're gonna say that he probably did save your life. And as for your first story, like, it really made me laugh because I've had family members who have been in that situation where they've just had major surgery or whatever, and they're insisting on doing things they shouldn't be doing, and it ends up being a row, and you're like, I am just trying to help you, and it's, you know, it's all very tense and in the most loving way. And I can just imagine you being in bed and being like, are you fucking seriously trying to climb the stairs right now? And then when she answers back and goes, no, but I can hear that too. Like, what do? You just sit in silence and go, okay, somebody's climbing the stairs. Brilliant. But then what do? You know, I've got my own experience that's hot off the press for you guys. It's just Andrea's experience of just sort of lying in silence and listening has made me think of it. So I was in bed last night, and I had just gotten into bed, and I was turned over facing my door, scrolling on TikTok, and I sleep with a night light on, so the room was bright, etc. My window was closed, and I heard a man's voice in my house just saying hello, and it was clear as day, and it came from the direction of my bedroom door, which obviously leads into like the heart of my house. So it was inside my house, and I knew it was real because when I heard it, my stomach dropped. You know, immediately I was like, I went into fight or flight mode, because I was like, there's somebody in my house and I am alone in my house and there's somebody here. And what did I do? Nothing. I just lay there in silence for a while, and then I was like, well, if there's somebody in my house, there's somebody in my house. But I knew I'd locked the door. And then I just turned on Family Guy and went to sleep, because I was like, I'm just not engaging with this. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Jeanette. Thank you to Kate and to Andrea for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from January the 2nd, 2025. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon, which is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.